Hey folks, it's Dr. H, your friendly war game guy at the Air Command and Staff College. I'm here to do a video about how strikes work in the naval environment. There are some differences, some nuances that are worth talking about that we will work with as we go along here. Let me just get one adjustment done. Okay. I'm not going to go through like a ton of like completely worked examples. We'll do that in the example of play video that's going to come. I just want to talk about how these things work, and I also want to talk about air ranges, right? This is a good opportunity to do that. So let's start by talking about air ranges. So questions about air ranges are right here. Remember that SMLU code that's in this corner right here, the upper right corner of an air marker. That tells you where it lies on this box. Now, there will be some games that you have tankers. When you have tankers, there is no U. Everything that's U becomes L, right? We'll remind you of that when we come to it. But this is the number of ranges. This is the distance it can move, right? So if we come here, if this Badger, which has a range of L, and it's based in China, actually wants to hit this carrier, it can't, right? Because China, 1, 2. There's all night. This is the closest it can get, is here in the central approaches. Again, if we're not using the tanker rules. We look over here. This F-35 has a range of L. Don't laugh. And it can go 2, right? So it's based on this carrier here, 1, 2. So it could hit this Chinese character that's underneath this area detection marker, right? So it could conduct a naval strike if it chose to. Now, when you do have tankers, you will get tanker points. You spend 1 tanker point and you move up. L becomes U, M becomes L, S becomes M, right? And so forth for each point you spend, right? So you can spend a lot of points and really gas up a lot and gas up one plane and get it to go pretty far if you want. Again, we'll remind you of that when it comes along. Excuse me. Okay. Naval strikes, for the most part, are conducted just like regular strikes. So, right, if I wanted to take this F-35 and conduct a strike against this Chinese carrier group, we do the same thing, right? We have air defense. Air defense may detect it. Certain things may happen once you've detected it on air defense, and then you can, right, and then you execute the strike. Where do you get your ADF values? You get them right here, naval unit ADF values, right? So we look, other CV SAG, this Chinese group has a detection of 6, a SAM value of 6, and a AAA rating of 2. One nuance, naval units always get the AAA rating if it's applicable, right? This guy's using a standoff weapon, so he's using standoff strike, so he wouldn't get into AAA range. But even if you fire a cruise missile and it's undetected, they always get that AAA shot, even if they don't get SAM or other detections. Another nuance that's a little different here is that units that are stacked together defend each other. So if this guy was stacked with a SAG, you'd get both the other CVN and the other SAG mark. They both would get to shoot, but remember, if they're both stacked, then they get the same results, right? So for movement, if you bring them together like that. So if you try to move that group together, all the groups that move together take the same result from movement. So that's one nuance, right? Your ADF values are over here, right? Don't forget, ranges matter now that we have this big board out. That's important. Let's see. A couple of other things to discuss is that interceptors for early detection can be drawn from the air superiority box of that area. So the Chinese could draw interceptors here from the Taiwan air superiority. But also, again, if early detected, I don't think they're going to probably early detect the F-35, but if they did, you can also take it from the ready box of any carrier in that zone, right? So, for example, if there's a strike against this carrier, then there's a strike against this carrier. I've got the sag underneath, so I'm going to stack them like this for a minute. There's a strike underneath this. There's a strike on this carrier, and it was early detected the carrier if it has any planes in its ready box, which, oh look, there is. Those can be used as interceptors. Same against this sag, right? So if this sag early detected a strike, then the carrier, because it's in the same zone, can also launch its interceptors. But that's not true if it was here, right? They had to be in the same C zone for the carrier to be able to launch interceptors to do that. If this carrier early detected the F-35, it could use its plane in its ready box. So that's slightly different, right? So if early detected, this guy could use Taiwan air superiority fighters or the fighters on his deck. If this carrier early detects, it can use the fighters on its deck. And if we move this guy back, remember, if they're in the same zone, strike this sag, this carrier can cover it. So those are some of the those are a couple of the differences that are worth talking about. Also, if we come over to the strike chart, no. It's one of these, I swear. There we go. That's detection and air defense. There we go, strike. You'll note, hardened unit and naval unit. Naval unit uses the hardened row. Right, uses the hardened row for these attacks. You'll also note that on the naval row, there's something called Naval 1, Naval 2, Naval 3. Those are things that have naval strike ratings. And you'll also note that versus naval is another set of DRMs that apply. These DRMs still apply, although most of them won't. These DRMs do apply also for attacks on naval units. Now, when it says Naval 1, Naval 2, Naval 3, those come in a couple of cases. One of them is if you are conducting naval missile combat. You can conduct naval missile combat in any combat phase, and both sides can do it at any combat phase. And the way that you do naval combat is that, one, you have to be in the same sea zone like this, right? So these two guys are in the same sea zone, so they could conduct naval combat against each other, but they both had to be, but you had to have a detected target. And the way that works is, undetected targets can declare attacks on targets, resolve them, but as soon as they do a naval combat, they get point detected immediately. Right, so he does that, he gets point detected. If this guy survives the attack, then detected units can attack other detected units. So this guy can get a free shot off, but then has to take the shot back, right? So they're going to shoot, and he's going to shoot. And again, to resolve strikes, naval strikes, you use this column here, right? So again, to sort of show you, right? This guy has point, right, a value of 3, so he's a naval strike 3. This guy has a value of 2. He does naval strike 2. Some special markers also have naval strike capabilities. I'll talk about those right now. In particular, I want to talk about the Chinese anti-ship ballistic missiles. This is the marker, and it says naval 3. So it's going to use the naval 3 strike marker. Right? That's where it goes, naval 3 strike. And it has a range of 2 zones. So this guy's in China, 1, 2, 1, 2, so on and so forth, right? Just like just like an air unit has a range of 2 C zones. It can hit any detected unit. We'll talk about this a bit more later, but EABO, if you have placed an EABO marker, we'll talk a bit more in depth when we get closer to those coming into play. Excuse me. It does Naval 2, but only in the zone in which you've placed the EABO marker, right? Also, when you place the EABO marker, it makes any movement in that zone automatically contested for the enemy. So we'll come back to those nuances. We'll remind you of those nuances when the time comes. And then finally, naval bombardment. So if let me close these up. So naval bombardment is a strike. The superscript number is its range in hexes. So you have to have moved a unit onto an all-sea hex, right? You had to be on the operational map now to conduct shore bombardment. You had to be, and then you had the range here. The Vietnamese SAG has a range of 1 hex, right? And so that means it can conduct a strike on this unit. And its strike value is going to be 1, right? So it's a normal strike. You do it like a normal HQ or artillery strike, but it's going to have a value of 1, right? And again, right, if we look, remember the U.S. SAG as a 3 is the big number. That means its naval bombardment is a strike 3, right? So when you roll on the strike table, you'll use that. A question that the answer to the question may cover, the answer is depends. If I'm in a cruise missile marked box, can the Chinese use cruise missiles to attack? The answer is it depends. If you have in play these ASBM markers, no. If these ASBM markers are not in play and they're not in the scenario, yes, you can spend a cruise missile point to attack a ship that you have detected in a cruise missile area. Now remember, you have to have detected all of these things to strike them. You can't strike anything that's undetected. Area detect counts, point detect counts. Area detect just as a modifier. That makes your attack slightly worse. So, again, just to kind of quickly sum up, you can strike naval units that have been detected. You can strike them with air. Air ranges are here, and that's the number of zones you can move. So here, right, we've got a U.S. carrier. If it has long-range aircraft, 1, 2, right, 1, 2. Note this dashed line is not something you can move across, so you can't go like 1, 2 to get to Japan. You have to go 1, 2, 3 to get up here if you had the carrier there. And then, so those are air ranges. Strikes are conducted just like normal. If you need ADF values, you use them. You look at them up here. This will tell you what they are. You can also do naval fires, right? To do that, you have to be in the same zone. You have to have a detected target. Use the strike value of this. That's the big number printed on the ship down at the bottom. That's its strike value. Once you do naval fires, you're immediately point detected if you weren't already detected. You can do naval bombardment if you are on the operational map. Right? The small number, the superscript number, that's your range in hexes. The big number is your strike value. Remember, all naval strikes are, all naval strikes are done on the hardened target. And if you have a naval strike value, you read naval 1, naval 2, naval 3. Ballistic missiles have a range of 2 sea zones. EABO is in its own sea zone and causes contested movement. And you can intercept from either that air superiority box, from a fighter you have in that air superiority box, or from the ready box of a carrier in the same sea zone. That pretty much summarizes it. That and the other videos have covered all the naval rules. They're not complicated. And I've talked about them kind of at length. There'll be an example of play coming pretty soon, but for right now, that's my story and I'm sticking to it.